Winter's grip melts away in the warm embrace of spring. Few organisms signal this yearly ritual more clearly than plants. Stirred by longer days and warmer temperatures, many plants embark on a complex and dramatic life cycle that will end with a new generation of organisms. While they may seem idle, plants are some of the busiest organisms on Earth. Over time, they have colonized most of the Earth's surface. We can trace this remarkable success to an intriguing range of reproductive strategies. Many exploit the anatomy and behavior of other organisms. Some employ natural elements, such as wind or water, in their quest to ensure the survival of their species. Spring arrives in a blaze of color, but these blossoms offer much more than fragrant decoration. Flowers play a key role in the shrewd reproductive strategies employed by the most prolific plants on Earth, the flowering plants called angiosperms.
Angiosperms certainly are the most successful of all groups of plants in the world today, and virtually all of the plants you see in terrestrial ecosystems are angiosperms.
The unparalleled success of angiosperms depends on their ability to bloom. Flowers are the plant's site for sexual reproduction. Flowers are actually modified leaves which grow from shoots stimulated by hormones. The leaf-like sepals are located outside the flower's petals. Bright and fragrant, petals often form showy patterns to attract animal pollinators. Many flowers grow both male and female parts. In the male structures, a thin stalk called a filament supports an anther, which produces and stores the male gametes we find in pollen. The female reproductive parts consist of the stigma, a landing pad for pollen, the style, a tube-like connection of the stigma, and the ovary, which houses the egg-producing chambers known as ovules. Flowers vary considerably, but they've all adapted toward one purpose: to improve the odds of reproductive success.
The ancestors of flowering plants had their beginning in water, and some primitive plants still rely on swimming sperm to reproduce. But survival on land required a new strategy. Over time, the ancestors of angiosperms developed a portable container for the male gamete that could operate in dry environments: pollen.
The evolution of pollination really had its greatest impact with the origin of seed plants, where pollen first appeared. And the reason for this is that all prior land plants required a period in their life cycle in wet environments for gametes to be transmitted. With the evolution of the pollen grain, you could have the transmission of the male gametes from the source plant to the plant where reproduction or fertilization is going to take place without any water.
Once free of this water requirement, the plants evolved a reproduction strategy that capitalized on another natural element: wind. But wind pollination has its limitations. The landing sites of airborne pollen are random, with only a small percentage reaching the appropriate target. A more precise strategy appeared when certain animals got involved in the pollination process.
If the way that's done is with a mobile pollinator like a bee or a butterfly, then there has to be a bright advertisement so that the bee or the butterfly will know to come to it. And there actually has to be a reward too, something like nectar in the flower, so that the bee or the butterfly gets something for its trouble, and then, reinforced by having been fed, flies onto another flower carrying the pollen and affects pollination of this flower.
Before pollination can occur, the flower must first produce mature pollen grains in the anther. Inside each pollen sac, cells divide through meiosis to produce the male gametes. These cells then develop into thick-walled pollen grains. When released, the pollen grains are blown or carried to the often sticky or hairy stigma of a receptive flower. Eventually, the pollen undergoes nuclear division to produce 3 nuclei. One, called the tube nucleus, controls the growth of the pollen tube. This carries the 2 sperm nuclei toward the flower's ovary. Meiosis has also occurred in the ovary, leaving an ovule with 1 cell. This cell, in turn, goes through a series of divisions to form a multi-celled sac, which includes an egg cell, the female gamete, and a polar cell with 2 nuclei. Eventually, the pollen tube grows through a small opening in the jacket of the ovule and into the egg sac, where fertilization occurs.
In nature, pollination often depends on the availability of wild insects. However, in the business of agriculture, it can't be left to chance. As our dependence on food crops grows, we rely more on professional pollinators like beekeeper Alan Mikulich.
I actually had a fear of bees when I first started out. I didn't like to get stung. If a bee flew in the room or the area I was at, I'd probably first one out the door. But in time, learning how to work with them properly and the techniques of working with them, I've developed. I'm not afraid of them. The crops that I pollinate are apples, avocados, some melons, cantaloupes and watermelons. And then in the summer, we pollinate alfalfa seed for seed production. And you start thinking about it, well, if we didn't have the bees to pollinate the alfalfa for the seeds, we wouldn't have the plants that we could feed the cows for milk or cheese or for beef production. So it gets to be pretty involved.
The relationship between bees and plants is subtle but effective. The bees benefit the flower in their natural hunt for food.
The pollen that the bees collect is a real sticky, moist pollen. And if the plant was to release it, it wouldn't go anywhere. So the bees have to transfer it from the flower to flower form. But the bees are collecting the pollen because it's a protein source and they feed it to their larvae. It's a food source for them. So that's why it's important for them.
Since both bees and plants benefit from the pollination process, many scientists see their relationship as an example of co-evolution.
The animals are, in many cases, reliant on something that the plant produces, such as nectar or sometimes the pollen itself, for their nutrition. And the plant is reliant on the animal to get the pollen from one plant to another in order to reproduce. So you can see there's a strong stimulus for evolution on both sides in a plant-pollinator relationship.
The shrewd pollination strategy of flowering plants seems to benefit all involved. The beekeeper makes a profit, the grower gets a crop, the bees get fed, and ultimately, so do we. To survive, flowering plants have overcome a key limitation. Unable to move, they've evolved a variety of clever techniques to propagate and relocate each new generation. Yet plants have not devised a way to deal with their most serious threat: humans. In 1927, an avid gardener, Susanna Bixby Bryant, decided to do something about it. To protect vanishing plant life, she founded the Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Gardens.
Would this be a good flower for a butterfly to land on?
California flora is incredibly diverse, and given that we have some 35 million people in the state, many of these plant species are on the brink of extinction because of subdivisions, farming activities, ranching activities, etc.
To save these endangered plants, Dr. Travis Columbus works to reestablish them in new habitats. To succeed, he must understand not only where a species grows, but how it reproduces. Deciphering any plant strategy begins with understanding the basic unit of reproduction, the seed. At the gardens, researchers store these tiny reproductive packages by the thousands in a seed bank.
Seed banks are important to keep seeds of species that are either on the brink of extinction or perhaps cultivars of crops that are not now cultivated, but which may become important later. A seed is a unit of reproduction for plants. Not all plants, but the group we call the seed plants. And a seed is composed of a seed coat, an embryo, which is the small plant inside, and a food source called endosperm. A seed can also be thought of as a baby plant with a sack lunch and a jacket.
Most seeds get their start in a process called double fertilization. First, the pollen tube created during pollination delivers the two sperm nuclei to the ovary. One nucleus fertilizes the egg cell, which forms the embryo of the plant itself. The second nucleus fertilizes the large polar cell to form endosperm, an important source of food for the future seedling. Eventually, the ovule separates from the ovary and develops a hard coat, leaving what we call a seed.
This is a portion of a Capsella burza pastoris fruit known as shepherd's purse, and these are developing seeds at various stages. I'm going to magnify on this particular seed. This is a longitudinal section through the seed. The outermost portion is the seed coat, and this is the embryo. This is a dicotyledon. It has two cotyledons, as you can see here. This is the root axis, and the shoot axis is not plainly visible yet, but it's between these two cotyledons.
Along with endosperm, cotyledons or seed leaves provide nutrients for early growth before the seedling produces its own photosynthetic machinery. But to ensure the next generation gets an opportunity to flourish, plants not only have to produce seeds, they must disperse them as well.
I think seed dispersal is a very important aspect of the lives of all plants, because one of the things that's the most interesting about plants compared to us animals is they don't walk, they don't move. So wherever they are, it's really important to them to disperse the seeds. Seed dispersal is one of the very few ways that plants can move around at all.
Seed dispersal also promotes genetic diversity as offspring travel from the parent plant and pollinate with other individuals. Some plants rely on the wind to move their seeds. Aerodynamic structures carry seeds to different locations. Plants with heavier seeds promote transportation through the tasty packaging we know as fruit.
Many of the things that we think of as fruits when we go to the supermarket are fruits that are sweet and tasty and good to eat. And those sorts of fruits have evolved, in fact, to be eaten by animals so that the seeds will be dispersed after having been eaten and transported away by the animal. The seeds usually being resistant to digestion, whereas the fleshy part of the fruit provides nutrition for the animal.
Some seeds can hitch a ride on a helpful animal by hooking onto its fur. Still, others rely on sticky substances which cling to feet or feathers for a long-range lift. Regardless of the method, relocated seeds must sprout and grow into adult plants. The lag time between seed dispersal and sprouting, a period called dormancy, can be long or short.
The lifespan of a seed varies depending on the species, maybe as short as a few hours in some orchids to thousands of years. The lotus, a common name for a water lily, is known to remain viable for thousands of years.
Before a seed can sprout or germinate, it must be triggered by specific environmental cues, such as moisture or heat. For researchers, isolating a plant's germination cues is a crucial piece of the reproduction puzzle. To reestablish an endangered species of grass, researchers at the Botanical Garden spent a year soaking seeds in water, hoping to produce seedlings. Only when they introduced a fungus found in the plant's native habitat were they rewarded with new shoots of this near-extinct plant.
We found that the highest germination rate was obtained in those conditions where the seeds were inundated in water and the fungus was present. Other plants have different germination cues. An interesting one is fire. And fire can go through a community such as chaparral, which is adapted to fire. And the heat and or the smoke produced from this will send a signal to that seed that it's time to germinate. If these seeds were to germinate prior to the fire, they would be in the understory of this thick canopy of shrubs, and there would not be sufficient light for them to grow and to reproduce.
Nature works in mysterious ways, perhaps nowhere more mysterious than in the reproductive strategies of plants. Scientists have much to learn before they can ensure the survival of the species threatened by extinction.
Reestablishing a rare species in nature requires a lot more knowledge than simply sowing the seeds into any habitat that one happens upon. These species are intricately interwoven into the ecosystem. Understanding of these interactions is key to the successful reestablishment of a species.
Many plant species increase their odds of reproductive success by forming seeds, which put development on hold until environmental conditions are favorable. When conditions improve, the seed germinates, and the plant calls upon an arsenal of molecular signals, called hormones, to continue its life cycle. We all recognize the outer signs of plant development, but few stop to consider the internal cues that direct this growth. Dr. Elliot Meyerowitz hopes to answer these puzzling questions.
I think we know so little about plants for different sorts of reasons. One is that plants are deceptively difficult to understand.
Dr. Meyerowitz is looking for answers in a tiny member of the mustard family, Arabidopsis thaliana.
The species Arabidopsis thaliana grows rapidly so that geneticists can grow many generations of Arabidopsis a year and get the results much more rapidly than for annual plants or plants that have a 6-month growing season. Another important property of Arabidopsis is that the amount of DNA in its genetic material is very small.
The genes Dr. Meyerowitz studies are often regulated by a class of signaling molecules called hormones that direct each plant's development.
Plant hormones are any substances that are made by plants and transported from cell to cell in plants and that act in low concentrations to regulate important and specific parts of growth and development.
Contrary to animal hormones, which have specific sites of release and response, plant hormones are released by many different cells, producing a range of effects. One avenue of research focuses on the response of Arabidopsis to a common hormone called gibberellin.
Gibberellins are involved in cellular elongation. Plants that don't make gibberellins are generally dwarfed. In addition, gibberellins play a role in seed germination, so that gibberellins applied to seeds cause them to lose their seed dormancy and to germinate more readily.
Another plant hormone, ethylene, confirms the difficulty of stereotyping these versatile molecules.
In the presence of ethylene, most seedlings lose their orientation to gravity, so that if it grows up into gravel, it changes its gravitropic angle, it curls up a hook to protect the growing point, and it grows a thicker stem to apply more force to the gravel and move it out of the way. Later in life, though, ethylene has completely different effects. In bromeliads, for example, it's important in the induction of flowering. In a lot of plants, it has something to do with senescence. For example, petal fall in carnations is an ethylene effect, and the reason why your carnations drop their petals is that the flower has started to produce ethylene at the end of its life.
Still another hormone, auxin, plays an important role in a category of plant responses called tropisms, when plants grow toward or away from certain environmental stimuli.
Let me give examples of two tropisms. One is phototropism, where a shoot grows towards a source of light, and another is gravitropism, by which roots grow towards the center of the earth and shoots grow away from it. The way shoots respond to either gravity or light is by bending. The cells on the side away from light or towards the center of the earth expand, and that causes the stem to bend. And this expansion requires auxin and seems to result from the transportation of auxin from one side of the stem over to the other.
Dr. Meyerowitz, however, spends most of his time studying the development of flowers, which often develop in response to certain environmental cues.
Day length and temperature play important roles in flowering. In many plants, the plant has to go through a cold period before it will flower. And in this way, plants make sure that they flower after the winter and not during it or before it. As the summer progresses, the days get longer, and long day plants respond to the lengthening of the day and flower as spring and summer approach. There are other plants that flower in the fall, like chrysanthemums, and they're responding to the decreasing length of the days, or more specifically, to the increasing length of the nights. We're trying to understand how pattern appears in developing structures. How it is that an Arabidopsis flower always has 4 petals and 6 stamens, which is the same question that one might ask in animal biology. How is it that a fly always has 6 legs and 2 wings, or that we always have 5 fingers and 5 toes? These are fundamental unanswered questions in developmental biology. The better we understand flowers, the better we'll be able to grow plants, and the more we might be able to modify plants to be better crops. We can do the same things our ancestors did, but do them much more rapidly so that we can evolve new crops and change our existing crops to be of greater service to us.
Plants have evolved a wide range of unique reproductive strategies, including many that blossom in petals of blazing color. While flowers come in many forms, they all work toward the same goal, to unite pollen and egg in the production of a seed. In gentle breezes or raging torrents, these seeds move to fertile ground. Given the proper cues, they sprout, producing a new generation of plants in this ongoing cycle of life.